Hello everybody. So in this video I'm going to talk a little bit about another journal article. This one is by Wilk et al. And it's about residential schools and Indigenous health. And it's a little bit different from previous articles in that it's a larger review of many articles and sort of summarizing that information all together. So just as I mentioned, the info for the article can be found here. So our title is Residential Schools and the Effects on Indigenous Health and Well-Being in Canada, a scoping review. And our authors are Peter Wilk, Alana Maltby, and Martin Cook. So if you were writing this in MLA style, it's citing it in your article or in your essay, you would use Wilk et al. And et al is just the short version. It's a Latin phrase that means, and others. So you would cite your first author's last name, and then if there's 3 or more authors, there might be 10, there might be 12, there might be 20 authors. You use the phrase et al if there's 3 or more listed, and it's just instead of writing everybody's name out, it allows you just to shorten it to et al, and that saves you time and word count, not having to put everybody's names in. The name of the publication, our journal, is Public Health Reviews, so it's italicized here. And then the date of publication is 2017. 38 is the volume, 8 is the issue number, and then we have our DOI listed here. So this article, as I mentioned, it's a larger review. It says a scoping review. So it's looking at, 60 different articles and 61 articles it says, and then sort of condensing that information down and summarizing it. So we get all of that information without having to read all 61 articles. And their focus is on summarizing what these articles are saying about the health effects on Indigenous peoples and particularly residential school survivors and subsequent generations of those survivors' families. They state in their abstract here, so their objective of the study was to identify the extent and range of research on residential school attendance, on specific health outcomes, and the populations affected. So they're doing a review, as I mentioned, of 61 articles, and their results show that physical health outcomes linked to residential schools included poor general and self-rated health, increased rates of chronic and infectious diseases, effects on mental and emotional well-being, including mental distress, depression, addictive behaviors, and substance misuse, stress, and suicidal behaviors are all prevalent in residential school survivors and their subsequent generations. So yeah, this article is really focused on physical health, mental health, and looking at specific findings in articles around those two issues, and how residential schools has, like, the trauma and that experience has had impact on the physical aspect of health, but also mental health aspects of Indigenous people's health. So they note in their introduction here just the background information that there is a health disparity between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. So there's a prevalence of more physical health ailments, obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and they're linking that with the history of colonialism and particularly residential schools. And they also talk about the prevalence of mental health and, mental health problems, including depression, higher suicide rates, substance abuse, and they're linking that to some of the traumatic events that occurred in the schools. Children, where we know children suffered from physical, sexual, psychological, and spiritual abuse in those schools. This article also links or discusses this concept of historical trauma and how that implies intergenerational trauma. So it's not just the survivors themselves who hold the impacts, the mental and physical health impacts of that event. It's also something that is intergenerational and passed down amongst families and communities through their, the next generation, the descendants of a family. So that's kind of what distinguishes trauma, like something that traumatizes one person, but historical trauma is a larger scope of impact throughout multiple generations. And there's a description of this term, historical trauma, in the article, and a description of how trauma is indeed intergenerational, with poor health impacts noted in children of survivors as well as the grandchildren of survivors of residential schools. And so they state they don't really have a thesis statement in particular. It's more of a sort of exploratory thesis. So their purpose. This is their purpose statement. So in particular, we ask, what are the health outcomes that have been empirically linked to residential schooling? What are the populations in which these effects have been identified, and whether effects are found among survivors or also among other family members in subsequent generations? So those are kind of like the three things that they're going to try to address in their paper. So, their purpose of doing this large scoping review of all these articles is to answer those kind of three topics. They provide a large methods section, so they basically just talk about what they did in order to get their information, all of the articles that they found, and then they're going to use tables, graphs, charts to organize all of the information that they've compiled from all of these 61 articles. And they list, what counts in physical health. So all of the conditions that they, group together in their findings. So things like arthritis, back pain, osteoporosis, asthma, allergies, epilepsy, stroke, high blood pressure, HIV/AIDS, all of these things are compiled as physical ailments. And then they group together mental and emotional health, including depression, anxiety, substance abuse, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, etc., etc. So you can just sort of see how they're grouping, physical and mental health impacts separately. And they're going to note their findings that way. And then they use tables here, which you can sort of read how they organize their findings. But I'm just going to go through their results here. Skip ahead. Okay, so their findings, they talk about physical health here. So they found that that indeed residential school survivors and subsequent generations have are reported to have, greater amount or prevalence of physical health problems. So this includes all of those conditions: diabetes, obesity, but also sexual health problems, sexually transmitted infections, and those things that we also identified or were previously identified in the Mosby and Galloway article: obesity, diabetes. And then they talk about mental health and emotional well-being. So they also talked about findings that showed higher rates or more prevalence of PTSD, substance abuse disorder, depression, and also they noted the higher rates of suicide and suicidal thought in survivors and their offspring. So yeah, their final thoughts, yes, they confirmed from their review or exploration of all these articles that residential schooling is an important contributor to the health conditions, the health in disparity, or lower, I guess, higher prevalence of mental and physical health issues in Indigenous populations in Canada. And that's basically kind of where they're going. They kind of concluded that way. But they acknowledge that there's, that they need to do more. There needs to be more studies and more better knowledge gained of the connection between something traumatic historically and the physical and mental health consequences of that. Because they can also craft, better health interventions and care and treatment of individuals to also help heal or break that cycle of trauma as well. And use, cultural sensitive ways to deal with mental health and physical health for those individuals. So that's kind of what this article is about. It's a large scoping review, so it gives a lot of information all in one place. But if you were more interested, if you were writing a paper or something and you wanted to explore one specific aspect of this study, you could, try to locate one of these articles individually and find more specific information on it. But this one is good for the reason that it's a scoping review, so it gives you a whole bunch of information from a whole bunch of articles all in one place, and it kind of summarizes trends or health patterns that are noted in the literature, in the articles that exist on this topic. So yeah, if you are, again, interested in the health aspects of the residential school system and how it has continuing long-lasting impacts, and that's something you're interested in exploring, or if you want to focus in on sort of mental health or physical health, this article does address both of those specifically. So I'll leave you with that information.